Hello, I'm Will Sampson. Welcome to the Woodworking Network Podcast. Welcome to 2021 and a new season of the Woodworking Network Podcast, where we explore the business of woodworking, big and small, and what it takes to succeed. I'm Will Sampson. This episode is sponsored by FDMC Magazine, and don't forget to take our survey at woodworkingnetwork.com/podcast-survey. Today, we'll be talking with Amanda Conger, Executive Director of the Cabinet Makers Association, about some interesting results from that organization's annual benchmark survey of the woodworking industry. But first, I want to talk about, is your business big enough? It's the classic story. Young entrepreneur starts out as a one-person operation in a garage and eventually becomes a gazillionaire. Was it luck or skill or both? When the business was started, was there a cohesive plan in place? Was it followed? Did everything turn out as planned? Having just survived the year 2020, we all can agree that no matter how well you plan anything, plans are likely to change. Who plans for a pandemic? Most business plans I've seen, and even the ones I've written, tend to work under a series of assumptions, the biggest of which is based on some kind of expectation of growth. It's a business truism that if your business doesn't continue to grow, you will likely fail. Just to keep up with inflation and growing overhead costs, you must continually add to your bottom line to keep business afloat. But how much growth is enough? How big is big enough? In the woodworking industry, there are thousands and thousands of shops that begin with a business plan that is little more than, I like to make stuff out of wood, so let's try to sell enough to make a living. That's not much of a plan, of course, but a surprising number of small shops grow from that to actually being productive and profitable businesses. As they grow, typically a more detailed growth plan emerges. It might not be written down, and it might be step by step. One product becomes popular, so the owner tries to figure out how to capitalize on that to make more and sell more. Maybe it requires buying more machinery or bringing on some employees. From there, it's hard for most healthy businesses to look back. But growth brings challenges, and at every bump in the road, owners are likely to wonder whether they did the right thing and what new path they should take. Whether the business is 4 people and the owner is trying to wear all the hats, or it's a big factory with a whole management team to wrangle, the challenge is really the same. How do you plan for growth and set up some way to anticipate and overcome the challenges along the way? One way is to think about the growth of your company not just in employee numbers or sales figures or profits, but also in survivability for the long term. Are you hiring for the long term and investing in both brain power and machinery? Do you know what industry benchmarks for productivity, staffing, plant size, and compensation are? How do they apply to your business? Do you have the depth to survive and overcome the unexpected? Do you have an exit strategy or plan for a new generation of management? No plan can account for everything. Soldiers talk about how the best of battle plans go out the window as soon as the first shot is fired. But focusing on thorough knowledge of your industry and building a dedicated team can go a long way to making your business as big as it needs to be to make it to the next step. Before we get to Amanda and the results of the survey, let's pause for a word from our sponsor. FDMC Magazine is your vital source of information to improve your woodworking business. Whether it is keeping you apprised of the latest advances in manufacturing, helping you solve your wood technology problems with Gene Wengert, or inspiring you with case histories about successful businesses and best practices, FDMC Magazine is there to be the sharpest business tool in your shop. Learn more and subscribe for free at woodworkingnetwork.com/FDMC. Today we are pleased to have as our guest Amanda Conger, Executive Director of the Cabinet Makers Association. Welcome to the Woodworking Network Podcast, Amanda.
Thanks, Will. Good to be here again.
Yeah, it's great. We're kind of reprising our annual discussion of the CMA Woodworking Network Benchmark Survey that gives a snapshot of the major segments of the woodworking industry. First off, who are the people who responded to this survey this year?
Well, it's open to the entire industry, not just Cabinet Makers Association members. And interesting, less than half of the respondents are CMA members. But the collective profile of all of the respondents matches that of a typical member. So the first survey question qualifies them by their role in the company. To proceed with the rest of the survey, they have to answer owner, officer, senior management, which is one option, or all of the above, because small shop owners wear many hats.
Yeah, we know that the people responding are decision makers.
Correct.
That's great. So what kinds of shops are there?
Well, there's a wide range, but as I said, it's similar to a CMA member, a typical CMA member. The majority of the shops are less than 5,000 square feet, but yet there were responses from owners of shops occupying up to 50,000 square feet. And also similar to the makeup of CMA membership, most of the shops have 5 employees or less, but there was still input from larger shops up to 100 employees. And then I thought the interesting part of this information was over 50% of the companies have been in business more than 20 years. And one respondent shared that they are still strong even with COVID because the reputation of the past 30 plus years in business has kept them busy with their backlog of repeat customers.
So these are all pretty much well-established shops.
Yes.
The data should be definitely interesting. What was the biggest surprise for you in this year's survey?
The surprise was the optimism in spite of the COVID crisis. One respondent also shared that despite the COVID concerns in 2020, they are set to more than double their revenue from last year.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Because I know that the whole COVID thing has just upended everybody's view of how things go. But we've heard anecdotally lots of shops seem to be doing pretty well, particularly in custom areas and doing
Correct.
Like home offices and things like that.
Yeah, one respondent also said about that there will always be a need for custom cabinetry. And I think that's true. The mass produced, maybe not so much, but the high-end custom work, people always have a need for that.
Right, and the box store cabinets, somebody's still got to install those.
Right. These guys do everything.
Yep. What are these small to medium-sized shops doing about technology? Have they jumped on the automation bandwagon?
Increasingly so. One of the questions we ask is about CNC equipment, whether they have it. And over half have CNC equipment in their shops. And a strong, I think 12% are considering upgrading and purchasing an additional machine. And then 10% who don't currently have a machine are considering investing in the technology. So that's a pretty strong representation of the interest and use of the CNC machines.
Yeah, I can remember when CNC was something that only big shops would go for, but now it seems to be just as essential as a table saw.
Correct.
How much of the interest in automation do you think is driven by the difficulties in hiring skilled labor?
Well, we know it's a known concern for the industry as a whole. As in previous years from the survey data, one of the biggest challenges they face is finding, training, and retaining qualified and motivated employees. And we actually use that word, motivated. But I think they are, because they're small shops, they wear many hats, and they also, entrepreneurs, as we know, like to control their own products and days and production. And because of that, they also prefer the automation over having additional employees. The overhead, all the things involved with employees is definitely an issue with the smaller shops, more so than a larger shop.
Well, the CNC machine isn't going to call into work sick on Monday morning with a hangover from the weekend.
Exactly.
Well, I know it's been a real challenge for a lot of these shops that were not technologically up to date to adopt that, but it definitely seems to be the direction that everybody is going. And it seems to be helping them financially. Let's talk a little bit about the financial numbers. What's happening with shop rates charged by these shops? Are they upping the ante and charging more, or what's going on?
Well, it's interesting information, and there's a lot of data there about it in our survey, but the billable hourly shop rate varied quite a bit among respondents, from $25 to more than $125 per hour. But the average was $51 to $75 an hour. But as you know, as an industry, pricing has been a challenge. In your pricing study, the fluctuation isn't predictable due to shop location, material availability, or even customer demand. This obviously is an area that shop owners struggle with, and they need more education about how to effectively charge for their services.
Yeah, I think that the shop rate issue is very much tied into smaller operations, especially not really having a real grasp of their costs and their overhead in particular.
Correct.
So I just find it really difficult to believe that a viable business these days, with all of the investments and costs, can have a shop rate that's only $25 an hour and really reflects their costs. I mean, even if they're running a garage shop attached to their house, if they really know what their costs are and utilities and everything else, it's going to be more than $25 an hour.
Yeah, $25 an hour is a hobbyist,
Yeah, that's just not realistic.
Yeah.
But getting up there in the $75 to $100 an hour seems much more realistic. I mean, contrast it with the typical trades. A plumber who doesn't have all of the big equipment that a cabinet shop has is charging $100 an hour.
Right.
And they've got a truck and some hand tools, and it just doesn't make sense. But and I think also it has to do with value.
Yes.
Customers value the work more than I think the shops realize, and they could get more money if they ask for it.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into the image of being a professional cabinet shop. And I think that by charging more, people will trust you more.
Well, and some of those low dollar customers aren't necessarily your most profitable customers, and may take more hand holding and all that, and you don't get compensated for that. So
Yeah.
We'll see.
Interesting that is those low dollar jobs like bookcases and things like that. People were getting a lot of during COVID, just small jobs, but it kept them going. But I heard anecdotally from several members that it just wasn't worth the hassle.
Right. Well, those kinds of jobs are great add-ons if you're already doing, say, a kitchen. Then you do a laundry room and some bookcases and some other things. You're already there. That makes sense. But as a one-off, unless you're set up to do that, it's likely not as profitable.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, a big part of the survey has to do with compensation for employees. What trends are you seeing there?
Compensation is typically the most useful data that small shop owners get from the survey results. It's the reason they want to read it and study it. But for each level of experience that we ask questions about, its entry level, proficient, and advanced, the responses provided, the responses were provided for the typical job types, such as designer, estimator, cabinet maker, finisher, installer, and even management positions. But overall, small shop owners are realizing that they need to pay all of their employees more in order to attract and retain the team members.
That's part of that equation with trying, they say, oh, I can't find skilled help. Well, are you paying the dollars to attract skilled help?
Exactly. And our industry struggles with that as a whole. It's kind of like the pricing thing. It's the value. They need to make that more attractive across the board.
Well, I know that information is very detailed in the survey, and it doesn't really lend itself to just talking over a podcast, but it's definitely worthwhile delving in, particularly for a shop that is expanding their workforce and wants to get an idea of what market rates are and what they should be budgeting for employees, and or if they're hiring new segments like sales or finishing or something like that. The survey has a lot of good detail in those areas.
It does, and it does require a lot of studying and analyzing, which is not something we can get into here.
Right. Now, what about the shops as far as their profits and the owners' compensation themselves? What does the survey tell us about sales and compensation?
Well, these again are difficult questions to analyze because the data is so varied depending on many factors, such as whether or not they pay themselves, the shop owners pay themselves a salary. But the annual gross sales for the companies who responded ranges quite a bit, from 250,000 to more than 5 million. And then the annual earnings for the shop owners also varied from 50,000 to over 200,000. So again, not a lot of meaningful data there unless you really dive deeper. But that being said, survey respondents reported that 2019 business was strong. 50% stated that sales were better than 2018. 36% said they were about the same. Now, the projections for 2020 sales are obviously impacted due to COVID-19, but for the most part, still positive, as I mentioned earlier.
That's great. Now, did the survey touch on their predictions for 2021?
No, we didn't ask that question, and it's a very interesting question. There's a lot of speculation out there that things may not improve for a while, but cabinet makers are doing great and have been doing great, and I think they're going to continue to do great.
Well, that's good to hear. Yeah, the whole thing with the virus is still continues to be a unknown as it affects the business, but it seems like the industry is still strong and poised to do well next year if folks work at it and study the data and figure out what their best approaches are.
Yeah, well, to that point, one respondent summed up the current situation, which I touched on earlier. What he had said, I have a belief that there will always be a need for a good cabinet maker. The economy will go up and down, and we don't have control of it, so we need to make good business decisions along the way.
Good advice. We have a summary of the survey in the December issue of FDMC magazine, but if someone wants to delve into the details, how can they get a copy, Amanda?
Well, they can order the results, the full survey data, for $39.99 from our website, and that's cabinetmakers.org. And there's a link on the homepage to the benchmark survey page.
That's great. And this is just one of the huge values that the CMA offers to members. And I would encourage anybody with a small to medium-sized shop to take a look at what the CMA has to offer, because it seems too often that those kinds of businesses are functioning in isolation, and they could benefit from networking with their peers and learning more what's going on in the rest of the industry.
That being said, well, we've seen an increase in membership due to COVID because of that reason. People want to network. They feel more isolated than normal because of quarantine and everything. And so they're reaching out to other cabinet makers through our membership options. And interestingly, so you can order these results for just under $40, but for $35 a month, you can join the CMA and get the survey results for free.
A good deal. That's really great, Amanda. And I'm sure we will have you back on the podcast in the future, talking about more issues related to the CMA and small to medium-sized cabinet shops. This is great information and a great service to the industry. Thanks for being on the Woodworking Network podcast.
Well, thank you again. Well, it's always a pleasure to talk with you.
That's it for today. To read a summary of the survey we talked about today, you can find a digital copy of the December issue of FDMC magazine at woodworkingnetwork.com. If you're looking for more of our podcasts, you can find all of them at woodworkingnetwork.com/podcasts and in popular podcast channels. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Thanks again to today's sponsor, FDMC Magazine. If you have a comment or topic you'd like us to explore, contact me at will.sampson@woodworkingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening.